welcome to the Ongaku Concept Podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Annie.
And this is a podcast where we discuss music theory through video game and anime music.
This week's episode, we're talking about texture. And you can understand texture as the feel of music. So the textbook definition of texture is how many layers there are in music and how those layers interact. From my training, I've learned to classify texture as monophonic, which is, well, I'll explain later. Monophonic, homophonic, and polyphonic. There's others, but for the most part, we don't see those kinds of textures in video game music. We just see these main three. So, I mean, can you guess what those classifications are?
I'm not entirely, because for me, I think of texture as it's definitely an arrangement thing. It's not. I don't think of it so much as the actual notes that are being played, or the actual chords or things like that, so much as how it's split up amongst instruments and how chords and melodies and harmonies and whatnot are relating to each other, in kind of like in a non-harmonic way, more like what's going on at what time and stuff like that. So I'm not sure what monophonic would mean in that instance if we've just got one voice or something.
Oh, no, exactly. That's what it is. You're just one line of melody.
So I'm curious as to...
Polyphonic. Yeah, you're on the right track. You're curious as to what?
I was curious, and this is something I was thinking about yesterday too. Like, if you have a single melody or something like that, how do you... because of I kind of think of texture as layers. How would you infuse texture, different kinds of texture into like a single melody line, like just not differentiating, like using different like dynamics or playing styles or something like that?
Actually, I do get to talk about that example in one of our audio excerpts that we'll get to later, Edward's Harp from Final Fantasy IV. The one word that you would probably use in a classroom to describe it is monophonic, and then everything else you want to talk about that line of melody, you wouldn't be talking exactly about texture. You'd just be talking about, dynamics, the swell of it, the phrasing of it. So they're related, but they're not in that classification.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so what would homophonic be?
So homophonic is a lot of our pop music where you have one singable melody and you just have accompaniment chords that don't follow their own melody to it.
Okay, I see. Because kind of like the like a stark contrast between more poppy stuff, like where it's just chords and melody, as opposed to more classical compositions where each
each line has their own thing going on. Right.
It's like different melodies that are intertwined to create these chords and whatnot.
And that's exactly what polyphony is.
Okay.
There's biphonic and heterophonic, but we don't see them in at least our concentration, so I don't think they're important.
So, what are some elements of texture then, like that would what are different kinds of elements that bring texture to a piece?
Okay, so texture again is how many layers there are in music. That's the first element you might want to look at. If you have two layers, it doesn't sound quite dense, or might not sound quite dense, versus if you had like a full band or a full choir, like a 4-part harmony,
right,
in a Bach chorale. The next part you would look at is how they interact, and this is where I don't know if you've looked at medieval to Baroque periods, but this is where polyphonic music was getting a head start because composers were talking about, or were playing with different counteracting melodies together. That's the whole study of counterpoint came from that, and I think we'll be able to find a lot of them if we look through our music today.
Is that, I was thinking just recently, is counterpoint the same as countermelody, or because I know what countermelody is, but
right, countermelody is more general, but counterpoint is the very distinct Baroque composing type that has to do with, like, literally, like they classify different species of counter melodies. So it's a
There's like
science.
7 or 8 of them, aren't they?
Right, it's a science. I don't like it. I like listening to it. I love playing it, but my gosh, just reading it just kind of gives you a headache.
I guess we can go ahead and jump into our first example to talk about monophonic texture. So this is Edward's harp from Final Fantasy IV.
So Edward's harp from Final Fantasy IV was originally written with the lyre in mind, because this is the character who's a bard in your party, and he's only really good for playing music. That was my experience with him in the game, and hiding. His move was literally hide. But he was good for playing these melodies, and this one is really interesting because it's, like I said, it's monophonic in texture strictly. But when you listen to it, your ears can differentiate between a melody on the top, which is like every 3 beats. Yeah, and then
I was hearing different chord progressions going on. And now that you mention it, there were never like really 2 notes being played at the same time. Aside from like the reverb. I never really noticed that until you pointed that out, but I do hear like different chords going on there. Like at the end of it before it loops, I heard like a really nice extended kind of 1+4 to 1 thing.
Yeah, that's I believe that influence came directly from Baroque composers, maybe unaccompanied Bach pieces, because what I've noticed is that when he's writing for unaccompanied instruments like violin sonatas or partitas, he's always using he has to resort to implied harmonies most of the time, so that's what we see here.
Yeah, and I think that, to me, I think that's the sign of a good melody, when you can hear cadences and stuff in your head when listening to it.
I think another important part about that, so if we can split this piece into melody and then the other, I'm so bad with vocabulary. I've looked far and wide for that vocabulary, but I can't find it because there's passing tone, neighbor tones, changing tones, but they're not either of them. They are implied harmony pieces, but I just don't know the name of them right now. But I think they're also really important in establishing the meter of this. I didn't mention that meter is something you can talk about with texture, but in some parts I really think you can, especially when you're judging between simple meter, which is split in half, versus compound meter, which is split in 3. And when you have
situations or like situations where you have polymetric stuff going on. Like I showed you a song recently, I think it was called Unchain by no, the band was Unchained, and the song was
that Japanese band.
Yeah. And during the verse, it was in common time, and there was like a bar of 3/4 at the end of the section. But throughout it, the lead guitar was playing this 5/4 rhythm.
That's so sick.
And it was kind of like circling, like it continued playing this 5/4 rhythm, and it would get off track, and then over time it would sync back up with the music.
Right.
It's really cool.
That's interesting because in that example, when you say polymeter, it's not exactly acting in the same way that I know what polymeter is regarding hemiolas, like the simple against compound, where this one is just simple against simple, but it's the counting part that's very different. But back to Edward's harp. Another important function I see in that other part of the monophonic line is the fact that it's really ornamentation of the entire line, because in a minute we'll pull up the condensed melody of Edward's harp from the Final Fantasy vocal track, and in a way you can think of it as a precursor to impressionist style of composing, where you have I guess different dots around your melody. So it's not exactly the melody is not exactly direct. It's given it's given to you by an impression based of the distracting elements around it.
So it's giving kind of like a vague idea.
Exactly, yeah. This one is more clear to us because it's kind of simply written. But we'll see in the vocal track how all of that just kind of disappears, and you hear the vocalist. The vocalist is gonna just sing the true melody that we hear out of this line from the lyre.
Sonhos da gente que espera paz.
I love the bossa feel of this track.
Right. Maybe it could be a new cover when we're done with.
Oh yes, we should. And obviously this has been expanded from the original version because more chord extensions and stuff have been added and substitutions and things like that.
At least to fit the style.
Right. You were saying the melody, the vocalist is singing the true melody, like that quarter note kind of feel. Right, because when I was listening to the harp version, I was hearing a clear quarter note melody going on, and I was kind of thinking of the other notes as the background, like chord arpeggios. Mm-hmm. So here we'll move on to another song. This is Sophisticated Fight from Sora no Kiseki, also known as Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky.
I love this so much. The wood blocks are a good choice.
They are.
So you could call this, polyphonic under classical terms, but I don't know. It's really difficult for me to find ways to talk about texture for very modern pieces like this.
Mm-hmm. Well, something I noticed, I think really the drums stand, like the first time I heard this, a friend of mine was streaming the game for me because I was interested in seeing it. And he got to like the first kind of training battle in the game, and this song started up, and I was instantly impressed by it. I think one of the reasons is the percussion. It's the percussion in general really helps with this jazzy feel, with the ride cymbal going on, and I also really like the way in the intro the ride kind of switches to the bell. Like if you look at a ride cymbal. I don't know if how much you know about how modern like drum kits work and stuff like that.
No, I don't.
But like the ride cymbal, the ride in kind of it can function just like the hi-hat. If you hit it on the kind of the edge of it, it creates that kind of reverby like sound.
Okay.
It's really quiet, and that's what's playing during most of this. But during that intro there, it started like if you hit like the very middle of the ride cymbal, that's called the bell. And it creates that kind of bell sound. And I don't know, I really like the way it switched to that. But what I found most interesting about the percussion was after the A section of the song, the snare is dropped completely. So it relies entirely on the kick drum, the ride, and the wood blocks and the upright bass to create the rhythm. I just find it interesting because the snare is such an important part of modern percussion and things like this. So to drop it entirely is a really interesting move.
Like it makes, I guess it makes the vertical aspect of it a little less dense.
Right.
Yeah. I was listening to this and I was thinking about how the different drums really stood out. And this was the analogy I was going to say. It's like you're eating like a soup. I don't know, let's say a soup with some fish in it. I don't know if people eat this, but
I've never had fish with soup.
no, so like it's like a vegetable stew with some fish. You have some potatoes and carrots, and those are like, I guess, your rhythm sections because they're really they're really smooth in your mouth. And then like you hit something like that pricks you in the mouth, and you're like, freaking heck, it's a bone, it's a fish bone. And you hit that every other fourth beat, and that's like your drum. But it's texture in food. So, I mean, your brother's a foodie, so I think you can appreciate this. But if you could like take that to your ears, like how do each timbres of every instrument stand out? And that's another way that the music has opened up for us to look at textures, you know, instead of the next piece, which is all the same instruments, pretty much.
Right, because I was thinking about this recently. Like, normally whenever I say texture on a daily basis, I'm referring to food. But you know, it is the same idea. It's variety in the case of music, it's variety in what you're hearing, whether that's rhythm or timbre or the way melodies are combining and things like that. And as far as like melodies and stuff go with this song, I like the arrangement. And texture is very much an arrangement kind of thing.
Oh yeah, definitely.
What I found really interesting was the way the brass kind of changed roles throughout the song, because it started out just kind of doing it started out following the piano on the melody, but later on it kind of shifted to just holding out chords, and then it would come back in to harmonize with the piano, doing the melody. I'm a newbie arranger, but I just found it interesting the way that the instruments changed roles and went from going in the background to the foreground and things like that.
Mm-hmm. You listen to a lot of chamber pieces, and that'll happen a lot, like string quartets. That'll happen a lot where the melody will be passed around if different instruments. And so usually you have the violin that plays the melody, but then the violin needs to pass it on to the viola or the cello. So it's up to the violin's turn to really hold the chords or toggle between different notes to establish harmony there.
Mm-hmm.
The next track that we're going to look at is Hidden, Forbidden, Holy Ground from Dot Hack Infection. What do you think?
For whatever reason, I've never really been big on choral pieces, but it really does have a lot of interesting ideas. Also, like, kind of harmonically, to go a little off track, I really enjoyed, like, I think there was a flat 7, major 7 there, right before the ending, and then there was, like, a sus chord, and ending on it. The ending is really interesting. This was composed by Yuki Kajiro, wasn't it?
Nope.
No,
she worked on a team for this game, but it's a very different composer. I have the sheet music. Let me pull that up.
Huh. I thought she did all of it.
Yeah, I thought so too. That's why it made me really excited. But hey, it got me to different composers too. Got me exposed to different composers.
I thought for sure, because she does a lot of choral stuff, and because this kind of ending on a chord without the third is really common for her style.
Right. This is exactly the kind of music that was in Dot Hack's Sign, the anime, which she worked solely on. But this is actually by Chikayo Fukuda. So I've never heard of this person at all.
Neither have I.
So I mean, I can't. Let me see. This is in some. What's 2 sharp minor? I'm so bad at this.
2 sharp minor.
I'm so bad.
You mean like a key or
What's a minor key with 2 sharps? I forgot
Oh.
everything.
B minor?
B minor. Oh my god. Okay. So the first. Let me look at the chords right here since I have the sheet music.
Oh, okay.
So it does actually. It ends on an E.
Really?
Yeah. So there is a wow. So it is flat 6, flat. And probably modulated to E somewhere. But if it
Yeah.
modulated to E, it went from flat 6, flat 7 to 1. Oh, that is so cool. Okay, so done reading the music, but about this piece, I really enjoy it because it's a historical composition. Not that it is taken exactly from historical pieces, but it's written in that style. And I took note I tried to differentiate between the different motets because that's the first word that came up to my head. Motets came from so the historic progression from monophonic to polyphonic music in around the 13th to 14th to 16th century was plain chant to plain chant, which included Gregorian chant. People are more aware of that. And then when they started slowly adding contrasting lines. Am I saying something stupid?
No, I just remembered there was this performance I saw once by this vocal group, and they were basically doing this idea of like music throughout the ages, and they started out with like really early
Was
chants.
this Pentatonics?
No, it wasn't. I don't remember the name of the group. I'll have to find it, but they started out with like really early music, and they were there's this one guy, and every time he sang like a third or something, the other guy would slap him. So it reminded me of that.
This one starts on a fifth, which is very important, but I'll get to that later. First, so it's plain chants to I think this slow development of motets, and then we get organums, or whichever came first, organums versus motets. They're in the same grouping, and then the most magical kind of polyphonic music that we get out of that period was the fugue. And so even though this is really short, you can't possibly call it a fugue, so I'm just calling it a cute little mini fugue. And that's really because there's different species of counterpoint involved in here. We'll link the sheet music, but you're free to look at it and see for yourself. So some things that people really take care of when they're composing counterpart melodies is subdividing. Yes, no, does that make sense?
No, continue.
No? Okay, so let's say the first line is singing in quarter note, and then the second line enters underneath that quarter note in exactly eighth notes.
Huh.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I see what you mean.
Mm-hmm. So that's the most popular kind. That's the most significant kind of. That's the most significant species of counterpoint that you'll see in this piece. But about the fugue, the reason I'm calling this a fugue is because once it enters on E, hold on, I'm not going to talk about the chords. Should I talk about the chords? No, it does. Okay, you can't make a definite decision there because you're hiding all the thirds.
Yeah.
And this is a composition where you really have to rely on implied harmonies here.
Yeah, it's not as the line is kind of blurred as to where it modulates, at least just from my listening to it.
Mm-hmm. And that's also part of the thing about fugues and polyphonic vocal songs. There's a music theorist out there who's going to kill me for calling this a song. It's not a song. Anyway.
Well, the bird. The bird is
There are AP music theory teachers on YouTube. He's gonna be like, these guys probably don't go to music school. And he'd be so right.
Spoiler alert, we don't.
We just love music so much. So the most important thing about choral pieces like this, especially polyphonic pieces like this, is there's no clear cadence points. that rarely there are clear cadence points. And here we have the end, just, I guess, to restart the loop in the game for whatever reason. But that's why I guess now we have a hard time finding the modulation. But that's also an important characteristic to fugues. And instead of sectioning them off by clear cadences, you'll section them off by episodes or by call and response. And that's the structure of this intro. That's why I would call it a fugue, because it starts off as an antecedent consequence between the one chord to the fifth chord. And that's, once you see that, you can be very, very certain that that's a fugue, or built very heavily influenced by a fugue. And then the last voice will enter in, not necessarily on the fifth of that, but also like it helps to build the chord, at least the third line. And there's only 3 voices here.
So I see what you mean, yeah, and you can definitely hear like the independent voices going on. I don't listen to a lot of music like this, but I found my ear kind of like fighting to listen to one voice or the other or something like that. So this is from the RPG Atelier Totori. This is The Waves Call My Name, composed by Ken Nakagawa. So what I find really interesting about this song is just the way the rhythm changes throughout. This is like kind of more like one of the hub themes. This plays when you're at Totori's village, just walking around. And so like after the piano intro, the bass comes in. And I think this song is really held together by the bass, as it should. But the bass is kind of playing this constant rhythm throughout, and the other instruments are coming and going and shifting in rhythm and in rolls and things like that. With like as the A section begins after that piano intro. I think it sounds kind of mysterious to me because, like, the way there's a bunch of the percussion's pretty sporadic, and the brass and the strings are kind of fading in and out and stuff like that. And after that little piano break, like with the octaves and stuff, everything kind of comes in full force, holding out the chords, and then after that, like 4 bars of that, the rhythm changes again, and it's a lot more syncopated.
For a looping track, like a piece of video game music, I think it's really cool to play around with the density of your music. Start off with one line, staggered entry, and then, like you said, full force, and then kind of die out again, or take out some instruments. I have a question though, because I couldn't hear it from your microphone. But are any parts panned left and right?
Yeah, I think the tremolo strings are panned to one side, the brass is panned to the other side. During the few points it shows up. The harp, I believe, was kind of panned around, moving around, which I find interesting. I've heard that before in quite a few pieces, like where a harp part is kind of panned around in circles.
Like it orbits around your head as it's playing.
Yeah.
I love it when pieces do that, especially like when you're playing a video game and then you put your headphones on.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a cool effect.
I mean, I don't remember exactly if it was in this song, but I know I've heard others like that. But yeah, and I really like that part after the when the chords kind of die out a little bit, and the electric piano comes in, which I really like the way things are kind of syncopated there, because the piano and what sounds like a guitar, I think it's a bouzouki just because of the thin tone of it. They're playing like more syncopated chords, and the woodwinds are taking the melody, and I don't know. There's just a lot of different timbres and stuff going on in this song, which is really, I think, all the texture in this song is what makes it so lively, because compositionally, like just or harmonically, really, it's a very, very simple chord progression. It only uses, I think, 7 chords, which when we're talking about video game music is not very many.
Really?
Yeah. Well, the kind of music I listen to. I mean, like it stays in the same key throughout. It mostly hovers on the 4, 5, and 6 chords. There's one secondary dominant in there, the 5 of 5. Occasionally there's the 2 and 3 chords, but that's about it. I think the shifting textures and rolls of the instruments is just what makes it stand out to me. And the bass line, for being so simple, I think is really catchy. I believe Ken Nakagawa is a bassist, and which would explain the good bass lines in this soundtrack in general.
I thought it was interesting that you were talking about textures. You said all of these textures, whereas when I listen to textures, I have to refer to it as of relating to the whole piece. You know, that's why the vocabulary is very important for me, like monophonic, homophonic to polyphonic.
Yeah, I guess I'm thinking of it kind of like various elements kind of pulling together rather than applying. Yeah, I see what you mean, because you're labeling texture, like polyphonic or whatever, relating to the piece as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's like I'm macro and you're micro in a way.
Yeah, I'm kind of like zooming in on everything, and but it is really interesting. And as when you're working with texture like this, when you have a lot of stuff going on, it's really important that you're really careful with the arrangement, because you have to make sure if things aren't panned correctly, or things aren't, or you have too much going on in one register, or just too much going on without proper separation, then it can become a bit overwhelming and difficult to listen to.
And it's funny that you say that in this regard in video game music, because when people are composing for live orchestras, you know, they're not restrained to their speakers or their headphones. They have to really rely on the organization of the instruments in an orchestra, how to arrange that. Not like they have control over that, because people play in in the same style for over centuries. But they have the open air to really judge the panning, if you will. And it's kind of funny that we have to like structure our listening and restrict it to these technologies.
Yeah, it is. Like, especially like really old video game music, like from the 80s and 90s, when there wasn't a lot you could work with. I specifically talking about panning. I remember the Sonic 3 soundtrack. It was all 16-bit Genesis stuff, and
the best.
Yes, and that soundtrack really pushed the Genesis to its limits, as far as like what it was capable of, like really creative uses of the limited voices to create all these different sounds. And a lot of times with the harmonies and stuff, there would be like you'd have your melody over the top, and then you'd have like a counter melody that was harmonized going on behind it, and the harmonized parts were panned all the way to the left and right, which I think is kind of necessary for separating the melody and the harmony. You had to pan it because there wasn't a lot you could do to separate them, especially if you were using similar instruments, similar tones for them.
Yeah, your ears might mesh them together.
Right.
So those are the pieces that are interesting to us in terms of texture. If you have your own that come to mind, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we'll talk about it with you there.
Yeah. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions, you can email us at ongakuconcept.com. You can follow us on Twitter at Ongaku Concept or on Tumblr at ongakuconcept.com. And thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week with a new episode.